Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of With Vichar. I am Lavanya Mugan, the co-head of press at Warwick India Forum, and I am elated to be a part of this endeavor. Today, we have with us our esteemed guest, Ms. Sonal Gyani. She is an LGBTQ rights activist, an independent filmmaker, a motivational speaker, and a diversity leader. She is a multifaceted personality and has been part of a Bollywood film W and the documentary Purple Skies. Along with that, she is a founding member of Yariyan, a youth collective initiative, and Umang, a support group for the LGBT community. Welcome, Ms. Gyani. It's an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you, Lavanya. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be part of this initiative.
Yeah, so Ms. Gyani, we've prepared a list of questions for you. So we'll just jump into it. So
Sure.
welcome again, and here we go. So the first question I have for you is who is an LGBTQ activist? What does he or she strive to achieve? What comprises an LGBTQ activist?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. Wonderful. And this is a question, I mean, I find myself asking myself quite often because, nowadays, especially in the last 2 years, I'm finding that a lot of people are calling themselves LGBTQ activists. And in my mind, I always thought that activism is related to being on the root, at the grassroots, working with communities and directly advocating for rights. But right now I think that, because gender and sexuality is something that is personal, everyone who sort of stands up for them, for themselves, for me is an activist, or for somebody, all people who are standing up for their as allies also are activists for me, because gender and sexuality is something very personal, and when people come out in their particular location in society, they influence society, and they become active agents of change. So I mean, even if it is just on the internet or it is keyboard activism, for me, I know and I have experienced personally over the years that even smaller small societies and communities can have a tremendous spark of tremendous change, but with just one spark, igniting one spark of conversation. So yes, that's what it is for me. There's every person who's talking about this issue openly.
The next question is what stops a closeted LGBTQ man woman to come out? Like, what are the barriers? Why, like, what stops them from coming out?
Yeah, so I think, like, when it comes to any societies, and in fact any communities, when you are in a minority, or there's a higher chance of you to be misunderstood. And whenever there is violence, usually it is the minority community which is affected directly when this happens. So when it comes to the LGBTQ community, they are not, mainstream in the sense of the conversations that are happening on in terms of somebody with, both. When we are talking about the LGBTQ community, we're talking about diversities in sex, biological sex, gender identity, and sexuality. So let's begin with, the diversity in biological sex. So there are many persons who are intersex, whose physical characteristics may not be stereotypically typically male or stereotypically female. But there are very little conversations that happen on bodies of people who are not stereotypically male or female, right? And because of this, when somebody whose body is not like what the mainstream is, might find it becomes very uncomfortable for them, because they might be ashamed of the kind of body they have. Plus there will be a lack of resources, so for a lot of intersex persons, they don't even know they have an intersex characteristic, till it shows up. So when it comes to intersexism, there are almost like 36 variations of intersexism that one finds. So, for example, there are people who may have lived their entire, almost their entire life, till they get married as a woman. And, when it comes to child rearing, they realize when they go to the doctor that they actually don't have a uterus, you know. Or sometimes also when you are growing up, you're like, for anybody, in fact, even if I talk about the stereotypical male, if there is a man with a man boob, very heavy man boobs, he's somebody who's ostracized just because you're different, right? So one is biological sex. The second is when it comes to gender identity. For a majority of people, we are cisgender, which means that what our biological sex is what we identify our gender to be. So if I have male characteristics, which means I have a penis, I look masculine, I have, like, facial hair. So I mean, I fit in very well because I identify as a man and then I'm following those gender norms. But if it so happens that, I am somebody who is born in the wrong body and I want to express myself as a woman because people are not comfortable, there is deep rooted conditioning around gender, they become really uncomfortable. If I had to explain this to somebody who was a mainstream audience, I would say that actually anybody who challenges a gender norm poses a threat to whatever's the, equation in the society. So, for example, if I had to explain this to somebody who's not at all connected to the LGBT community, I would say that, you know, if it's a boy, he wants to grow up and has the dream of becoming a dancer, you know, not very many people will be comfortable. Or even, if a woman, like we saw in, like, for the story of the Fogart sisters, that women who want to take up wrestling, this is something that, society is uncomfortable with because gender norms are very, very strict. So, I mean, we have some very strong, deep rooted social conditioning when it comes to gender. In fact, gender is not just even about people, it's about everything around you. We, in fact, associate gender to even colors. Like we say, pink is a feminine color, blue is a masculine color, you know. But actually, all gender norms are something that can be challenged. So, for example, let's talk about the color pink and blue. Actually, if you would have gone a few years back, you would have found that the color pink was considered a masculine color and blue was considered a color which was dainty. But because of, the kind of media around the different products, now we believe it is otherwise. And in fact, it is true for other things also. So now we actually find women who are wrestling. So for some time ago, like even, when you look at the educational movement in this country, actually people were not in favor of women, of girl child being educated. And the first few people who fought for the education of women, if you will see stories where, when they would walk to the school, they would carry an extra sari because dung would be, flung at them. But I mean, because this is what it is, conditioning around gender norms is very deep rooted. So the minute somebody starts challenging them, challenging the color code or challenging the dress code, this makes people irrationally fearful. They feel like, this will invite other kinds of, basically resistance. So which is why if a transgender person who wants to express themselves as the gender they are, they will invite violence on themselves. Anybody who's in fact different or in the minority will be bullied, you know. So, for example, fat children are bullied, you know, somebody with a stutter is bullied. And so, if you are a queer person, you're a very easy target for bullying because, really speaking, children are they are the mirror of the society. So, a lot of LGBTQ people will face, almost everyone will tell you they have faced harassment or discrimination when they were in their college spaces. Then let's talk about sexuality, right? We live in a country where we believe in arranged marriage, and it's decided for us that who we should love or who we should not. In fact, for women, if you look at in majority, like, the prevalent myth that people want us to perpetuate is that, women can have attraction towards somebody only after they are married. Before that, they should be asexual. This is absolutely like untrue, right? Adolescence is when you start realizing what your sexuality is. So if it's already difficult for heterosexual people, to speak about their attractions to, in fact, the opposite sex. In fact, even talking about being in love in terms of intercaste and interreligion is so difficult. So you can imagine if I am somebody who's a same-sex person, this will also obviously it doesn't sit very well with people because the status quo is affected. But mainly, it's actually really because we are conditioned to believe that gender norms are something that are rigid and they should remain rigid. There are very few people who are actually questioning that conditioning. And when you start the process of questioning the conditioning around you, not only does it come to sex, gender, or sexual diversity, you will start questioning a lot of things around you. Which is why when like when people say, "Oh, I'm an ally," I really you want to kind of start questioning the word because everybody is queer in some sense. You where your gender norms will challenge you at some point or the other. But right now, these are the prevalent communities which are very directly affected with violence, and this is why it happens. It's seated in prejudice and kind of social norms around you. and people want to believe that, oh, I mean, people don't. We have been taught not to question things, you know, because when we the first few times, then when we asked questions, we were shut up. So that is what we've learned to accept to be the truth. But the more you are on the journey to like question things, you will be more accepting. Is what will happen.
Just like sort of delving on that question, I wanted to ask you, like, if you read the mythological stories, right? So
Mm.
there are plenty of examples where sort of gods, they basically change their gender in order to, like, for example, Vishnu became Mohini in order to express
Yes.
his love towards Shiv. But now what we see is, like, for example, the religious clerics who sort of express sort of authority over religion, they say that homosexuality is not allowed. Like, for example, India as a country doesn't allow same-sex marriages, but we've seen in the past, like, it's been happening in our mythology. So, like, how
Yes.
do you view this? Do you think we as a society regress, or like, because we were already sort of moving in the right direction? Like, if you go to Khajuraho, you'll see all the paintings expressing homosexuality. So, do you think we regressed as a society, or like, how do you view this?
Right. No, so it's important to understand the history of the LGBTQ movement also in
Yeah.
India and otherwise. So when you're right when you say that the texts such as the Mahabharata or the Ramayana or in fact any of the other texts around Hinduism, there is a lot of referencing to different sexual and gender diversities, and in fact there is acceptance and space for such diversities within society. But the when this point changed, when this started changing, was actually when the colonization of India happened. So the when you look at British law, it's based on in Christian morality. Actually, their penal codes are come from the Roman Catholic Church,
Yeah.
and that they were that Christianity at that time, the interpretation within them, they introduced, they were not comfortable with any gender diversity, so they made it criminal for any kind of expression of diversity. And so when India got colonized, and not only India, all the other Commonwealth countries, when they were colonized, these laws were brought into these countries, including India. And there was a systematic breakdown of any kind of texts around any gender diversity or sexual diversity. So one, of course, Section 377 was introduced, which criminalized any kind of same-sex sexual acts. And the other thing that was introduced was the Caste and Tribal Act. So before that, if you look at the Hijra communities, they had a very prominent space in society. In fact, they were very much advisors of the defense of the country, and they posed a threat to the British colonizers, which is why this act was introduced, where they were outcasted from society. And they were outcasted from society, so now the only modes of earning that were left to them were, you know, things such as sex work or begging or, say these badhais that they go for. Because society I mean, that is the best way that to, what do you say, to make sure that if you want to disempower a community, you make sure that the rules are formulated in such a way that they are outcasted. That is the easiest way to marginalize somebody, and that is what sort of happened to the communities. Not only did they bring laws, but they also systematically, whatever culture or art was promoting any kind of or talking about any kind of sexual diversity, they very much made sure that that didn't happen. And any libraries where there were such kind of texts, they were all sort of burnt during this kind of systematic removal of any kind of referencing. But like luckily for us, now times have changed and India is independent. We finally let go of Section 377, which is a 200-year-old law, which has actually been thrown away in Britain itself, but India hung on to for 200 years. But now we have like LGBTQ activists who are writing about history or writing about references to homosexuality. In fact, there's a great book, if you haven't read, called Same Sex Love in India by Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidwai, which lists references to all the references of queer stories amongst religion. At a personal level, I've been part of of the National Economical Forum on Gender, Sex, Sexuality. This is a group of people who are working with religious bodies in India on gender, sex, and sexuality. And the group consists of LGBTQ activists, religious leaders, and religious leaders who are also part of the community. And what the group is doing is that they are now looking to, understand what the text really says. Because the thing is, so far, whatever has been passed down to us in terms of religion is an interpretation. It's not actually what the text says. And it has been very heartening and enlightening to for me to know that actually the text is completely different. There are multiple references, even within Christianity, positive references to homosexuality, but only one or two are like cited and used to, claim that the entire religion is against sexuality. The group also consists of people from Hindu backgrounds, Buddhist monks who are queer, people who are Islamic and Sufi, and it's been very enlightening to be part of this process. But I mean, historically, if you look at a religion, because of this, the legal and social and religious intermingling that has happened, we have actually found that when it came to our legal battle, it was actually religious communities who got together, who petitioned against the decriminalization of homosexuality. And unfortunately, actually, if you go through the petition and what their argument is, you will find that it is actually quite irrational. It's not rooted in reality in any way. And it's a very, very singular homophobic view of the text. But fortunately for us now, there are other religious bodies who are coming up and talking about this. Luckily for us, India is based on constitutional morality and not religious morality, the law of the country and the law of the land. So that has actually helped us challenge the case. But there is a long way forward in terms of, talking about sexuality, because like in Hinduism especially, which is the majority community in India, there isn't a particular religious head, and the way Hinduism operates is really different. So, while there have been Hindu leaders who have spoken in favor, you can't really like take their opinion as the opinion of the majority. So there's a long way to sort of go, but I'm hopeful, and I'm also very confident in the constitutionality uh, of of the Constitution of India. And it is written in a way that it can protect rights of queer persons.
Okay, so you mentioned Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Like, so basically, the Indian Code countermanded Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. But like, we still see that the government doesn't recognize same-sex marriages or the right of the LGBTQ community to serve in India's military. So, do you think these laws should also be repealed if we are advocating for total acceptance of the LGBTQ community? Do you think that
Yeah.
there needs to be sort of a law to sort of repeal all these rudimentary laws?
Right, that's a very important question to ask, and it's very important to make the distinction between decriminalization and legalization. So when it has come to Section 377, Section 377 was criminalizing the LGBTQ population. Now, if you have to fight for legal rights, criminals cannot get legal rights, right?
Yeah.
So first, what we need to do is like remove the criminality, and so that is why Section 377 was the first step to go. But a lot of the queer community has unfortunately, and in fact, the larger opinion also is that unfortunately this is an assumption, oh, that now we have our legal rights. Okay. In fact, like I sometimes actually am approached by people who had a marriage, and an advocate like signified them as like a married couple, and now they want other rights, but it's not legal, and they don't realize that they have been fleeced by an advocate because they may be coming from a smaller town. So of course, like now that Section 377 is moved forward, what we need is to guarantee full constitutional rights to queer persons. This means talking about adoption, talking about marriage, talking about an anti-discriminatory law, talking about property rights. And I mean, this is the second step forward. What has happened though is that with some judgments which have spoken about the community, these judgments are, say, the Mental Health Bill, the Mental Health Act, the NALSA judgment that came out, which talked about the recognition of transgender persons, and Section 377. The judgment that the judges have given has given enough ground to support uh, the case for these constitutional rights. So, for those who don't know, actually, when the way the legal system works is that if one particular Supreme Court judgment says one particular thing, then that is considered the voice of the Supreme Court. So if one High Court says something, that is what is supposed to be the voice. It can't be that one High Court is saying something else and the second High Court is saying something else. So you build on what are the previous judgments. You have to talk about them. It can't be like in isolation. But right now, what has happened is the Supreme Court, and it is the topmost judges who have done a curative petition and reversed the negative verdict that came out. These are the topmost judges, and within their judgment, this is the voice of the court or the legal body of India, and this is the highest body of India. They have said that queer communities have the right to equality, and they should be given the right to marriage, etc., etc., etc. So when we now fight the case, we can actually draw on what has been said in the previous judgments to look for a positive, judgment. And of course, a fresh petition will need to be filed, to move forward in that direction. But the court has given us more than enough ground to do that. Of course, India is not. The challenges that sort of lie before us is that one, of course, we are going to have, even largely because still religious bodies are homophobic. We are still going to be challenged by them. The second problem is the current government. When Section 377, was being fought in the Supreme Court, the bench Supreme Court asked for the opinion of the current government. And what the current government had to say was that they are in favor of decriminalization, but they are not in favor of any other rights. So the judgment should be restricted to criminality and not talk about marriage or any such things. So which means that it's very clear that the government is not going to support you. So when it comes to the change, what happens is how laws are formed in this country is they are supposed to pass through the parliament. Judiciary does not make the laws, right? Judiciary can tell the government or instruct the government, but the laws, the process of making a law is that you have to pass a bill in the parliament. It should be passed in the lower house and the upper house and then passed by the president. Then it becomes law in the country. But if the government that exists right now has made it stand very clear, so if we introduce the bill in the parliament, it will definitely be opposed. So a lot of lobbying still remains to be done before we can look at legal change, and this will have to be at multiple levels. One, of course, at a social level by these kind of interviews or talks or sensitizations, but also at a parliament level, a political level, a legal level. So it has to all three marry each other and move forward. And even with religious bodies, because right now the way the government is, they are obviously definitely influenced by what the stand of the mainstream religious bodies are. So it will take some time, and one has to do this a little bit strategically. If we go to court, even if the court grants us, like it says, like it already has, in fact, even if it instructs its government, it's going to meet a lot of resistance in the parliament.
So, like you said, the parliament has to pass a law if we are supposed to grant the LGBTQ
Pass
community
the bill,
anything.
yeah.
So recently, the government passed a bill, the Transgender Protection of Rights Act. Now, how do you view this act? Do you think it's sort of helpful for the LGBTQ community, or it's going to bring more detriment to them? How do you view this act?
Mm, So the problem is actually even the history of this transgender bill. Okay,
Yeah.
initially it was introduced by the BJD. It was in a very different format, and it was done in community with consultation with the community. But then that previous bill was removed, and then they put a bill. The BJP introduced this new bill, and the problem is that they have not really consulted the community, and they have not understood the transgender community. And so there are like problems in in the bill at multiple levels, right? One is initially, though, it was not even allowing people self identity. It wanted people to be produced in front of a magistrate, and their bodies need to be checked before they will agree that they are transgender, which was completely going against, like I told you, right? NALSA was the Supreme Court instructing the government to do something for trans people. So now they introduced this bill, but it seems like they did not read the judgment at all. So they were not allowing self identity. They introduced some penal codes for harassment or violence against transgender persons, but it was not equal as in terms of like other laws. So for example, when it came to say violence, sexual violence, they are giving something like, a 6 month sentence to people who may have raped, which is like otherwise life imprisonment or very strict
So
cognizable
there's like a
offenses.
7 years imprisonment for like normal rape, and like this is
Yeah,
completely discriminatory.
so there's a reduction. They have made begging criminal. Okay, now the problem is that the hijra community has really relies on begging as one of the modes of earning, because corporates are not willing to be inclusive, and they are not becoming inclusive at the rate that they need to be. So now the only mode that is left to them for earning, that also you're criminalizing. So it feels like, the people who have drafted this bill have not at all like done this in consultation with the community and without seeing what the effect it could have, and they've just gone forward and made a bill. Like, even when you look at the welfare board that has been made, for example, very recently in Maharashtra, a transgender welfare board was formed, which has only hijra persons on the board, no trans woman, no trans man, no non-binary identity. This is very problematic. Like, the way this government has been working, it is not taking in hand community with them, along with them. So there has been a lot of resistance from the community, some protests, some interventions to try to work with them, but they have not listened to any of us, and they have passed this very regressive bill, right? So this is not the way to work. Absolutely not. It's actually very condemnable, and it's really sad that like a bill that was supposed to protect transgender persons can now very easily be used to harm them. You know. So yeah, though that is my view. Like, when such things are, when laws are being made, or any programs or welfare schemes are being made with the community, from the time of ideation to the implementation, they should be done with keeping the community at the table, you know, with you while doing this. And it seems like that has not happened.
Right. Moving on, then now you mentioned a case where, like you said, the corporates are not willing to absorb people from the LGBT community. So just drawing on that, do you think the Indian society is sort of accepting of the LGBTQ community, or they are still like very, very sort of conservative in their approach? What
No,
do you think about
so interest, like, it depends from society to society and what communities they're part of. Sometimes I feel meeting the different kinds of people in India that we belong to five different eras, right? So, social change in different places has happening at a different pace. What we are finding now is, earlier, like, the word, like, the queer populations were invisible. Right now, people cannot say that, oh, there's no queer person,
that?
because, if nothing else, they have seen a pride march or something on the television,
Yeah.
right? So now they can't deny that, they have not seen Indians in pride marches. They can't deny the existence of people. Some societies, I feel, are like moving more progressively, where, people from society, there have been active agents of change who have pushed. So wherever there has been more access to resource and information and communities forming, we are seeing quick change. Part of the reason is also because if you look at the LGBT movement, it's also very much tied to the HIV/AIDS movement,
Mm.
right? So HIV was a big concern amongst LGBT communities because they were one of the populations which were the most affected by HIV. This was because not enough intervention was being done with these communities, and not enough information given on the spread of the community, and the discrimination allowed for the faster movement of HIV within the communities, and a lot of people were dying. So because of this, the health, and of course this also affected the straight communities. Not like they can be away from it, because marriage was not acceptable in the country. So of course a lot of gay men got married to straight women in hiding, but continued to have sexual relations. So of course the HIV has spread amongst women who have not had sex with anybody else other than their husbands. So I mean, it became an AIDS epidemic actually in the country. So because of this, the Health Ministry of India has, supported a lot of community-based organizations to do work in terms of talking about health within the communities. But because of the existence of such organizations now all over India, it uh, under health, it has allowed for some advocacy to happen, for people, for more awareness and sensitizations to happen with other stakeholders, which are not just health. So these smaller communities all around India, even in smaller districts, they have been sensitizing people who are stakeholders, like, the police, the medical staff, teachers, families. This is why when you look at, it comes to people's awareness on gay persons and hijra persons, the awareness is very high. HIV does not affect lesbian and bisexual women populations or trans men populations in the same way, and therefore you will see that there isn't enough about LBT, resource access to resources, and the movement of LBT persons is or other identities far behind than gay and transgender or hijra persons. So one is finding that in society there is more acceptance of the hijra community, one because of the health movement also, but also hijra is a ethnic community which has been part of India for many years, and so that is also one more reason where they are looking at supports. I feel like society is changing. Definitely the last 10 years the pace has been very good. I would say that a lot of corporates are now openly supporting LGBTQ. You can see it in their logo changes. We need to see this translating in their policies, in them reviewing their policies as well, and really putting their best foot forward in terms of working on inclusion and diversity. So that will take a lot of time, but I'm finding that in my personal experience that like earlier 10 years back when I was new, I started working in an NGO. I remember I was in a project, and my target was that in a year I need to do one sensitization a month uh, in different educational institutes. And I remember in that first project, this was in 2009, 2010. I mean, I couldn't even manage one a month. Okay. Like I could not meet the target of 12. But today it's the Pride month, and almost every single day I have had, if not one, two, or three talks, and a majority of them are led by students or people from educational institutions. And this is a really big change, that there's a push from the young youth and students to talk about gender and sexuality. So I feel like that's a very dramatic change that has happened. Even when it comes to legalities and in corporate spaces also, although I'm not seeing medium or small industries, working so much on inclusion, but big corporate houses definitely, like in Bangalore, which is the corporate hub. There are actually, there are two groups which are corporate groups which are working on diversity and inclusion. This is a collective of people working for different corporates, and these two groups actually exist. This was something we would have felt unheard of like earlier. Even when it comes to like mainstream representation, we are having characters which are positive. Like, so for example, Ayushmann Khurrana's film,
Yeah.
which was what is the name of the film?
Shumangal Zada Sahab.
Shumangal Zavda Savdhan. Sure, the film had its problems. I'm not saying it didn't have its problems, but this is the first time we are seeing like a superstar, playing a gay
Actor.
character who is proud of proud of himself. We have never seen it. I mean, I definitely did not imagine it would happen so soon. You know, I did not think so. And the film it ran well in, by its standards. But this is something I could not have imagined happening so soon. And not just Shubmangal Jada Savdhan, we are seeing multiple smaller characters also, in TV shows or in films who are supportive, positive. And, we are finding that some celebrities are coming out. These lawyers who fought the case, they came out. There are chefs, dancers, very well known personalities who are sort of coming out. So I feel like in the last 4, 5 years, but definitely the last 2 years since the judgment, uh, it's very difficult for people to say, I don't know of any LGBTQ person in India. This same thing, if we would have gone 20 years back, it would be like you wouldn't know. Even if I told you
Exactly.
count two people, you wouldn't know. And now people can very comfortably claim, or, although it's problematic, the whole country talks about Karan Johar's sexuality, right? So the thing is that you can't deny, that people don't know about it, have never heard of the identity. It is a conversation people are having. And this, I think, has been a dramatic change. The minute the community gets visibilized, a lot can happen. And I think when it comes to the LGBTQ movement, this is one problem the lesbian, bisexual women are facing. Women's issues are still not being talked about. It's predominantly gay people or hijra communities or upper class gay persons or upper class queer people, upper caste queer people who are, whose voices are being heard.
All right. So, just like drawing on that question, one thing I've observed is like for the elite class, it's like a bit easier to come out if we compare that to, for example, the poor people or the people who are living in penury. It's like quite difficult for them to come out because still the sort of the benefits of the LGBTQ movement, it has not been able to penetrate to the sort of the poor people. So how do you think their mental health and sort of their personal experiences are affected because they are unable to come out? So I
No,
think
that's
that's a
an
problem.
that's an interesting question because I feel differently.
Okay.
I think that when it comes to communities which are lower income or from poor families, uh, they don't. It's not. I don't think they have a choice about coming out.
Mm.
Okay, they are outed without when they already have they have to live out,
Yeah.
because the thing is, one, if you look at spaces, the spaces that they will be habiting, they will mostly be cohabitation of families.
Mm.
Especially if you come from, say, a slum area, the
Mm.
whole family lives, within the area. So if you are a transgender person, it's very common for children of the whole, like, slum area to be looked after collectively by parents. And there's a concept of like every door is open, so children are everywhere. So the thing is that everyone knows your sexuality or your gender. It's not something that you can sort of hide, which is why I think that the violence on somebody who is from low middle income is higher. Okay. And maybe it's difficult to come out with pride, but a lot of them are forced very early on to sort of come out, because they are subjected to much more humiliation or violence because of course, poverty adding into the intersection. When it comes to upper class people and elite people, what I'm finding is that a lot of them can choose to not be out, you know, because they feel that they don't need to tell anybody and they can enjoy that freedom because they can just step out of their house. They can go to another, they can leave their house and move to another city. You know,
Exactly.
this is what majorly most queer people do. Leave the city of your parents or your neighborhood and be out in another city. And sometimes even the workplace may not allow you, but you have the privilege of hiding your sexuality, which is why a lot of people choose to do that. But I don't think that that much is available. So there are both. I mean, there are both plus and minuses. So, for example, if you look at when you look at the Pride movement, and actually if you look at LGBTQ activists, they will mostly be elite and upper class. So this might give you an
Exactly.
impression that it's mainly. But if you go into the health movement, where the health movement and the gay movement intersect, and these are the voices that you don't hear, you will actually find that there are many more people who are from lower middle who are out than elite people. In fact, when you look at, so which is why I think like Bombay Pride is an interesting pride to see, because it is the biggest pride, and the biggest pride is only because in terms of numbers, it's only because the HIV movement and the NGOs, they have actually really reached out in terms of outreach. The same can't be said about like people, but yet their voices are missing from the narrative. You know, um, so I mean that's what I feel like. Coming, I don't think you have a choice to come out. You will have to come out. I mean, or you'll be forced to come out. But if I'm somebody who's a rich kid who has parents' money, like I don't feel the need to really come out. You know,
But
which
like,
is
do you
why we
think?
find that celebrities are not coming out, but like people in regular walks of life, they have faced enough trauma that they have to come out. You know.
No, but like, do you think like for someone who's like elite, like
Mhm.
probably due to education, due to like access to better facilities, it's like probably like they're
No,
accepted
I will.
more compared
No,
to
I
like
will say that. I will say that like when it comes to somebody who's elite, they have more access to resources. Okay.
yeah, exactly,
So they would have found out information about LGBTQIA. So they
yeah,
are aware of their identity, and
yeah,
because of access to support groups and resources online,
yeah,
they might come out. But I still find that not enough elite people are coming out because they have a choice to stay in the closet.
yeah. But
This is what I
that's
feel.
exactly so.
So which is why I think that it's a very interesting question. And my personal experience is this, that that choice of coming out still remains for them, but also they come out because there's access to more information.
Mm.
But I think if you ask me in terms of sheer numbers, that I'm seeing. There aren't enough elite people
No, no,
who are
still,
out.
like, of course, a lot of people choose not to come out, but like in
Talk
just
about, yeah,
terms of comparison. So
yeah,
just like
yeah.
drawing
So
on your previous answer, how do you think the mental health of people who like are not able to come out, how do you think their mental health is affected because they're not able to come
no, no, I think that mental health is definitely affected. Like for queer persons, especially who are wanting to be out about their sexuality, and even fact who are not, it's very easy that marginalization, owing to the marginalization, many of us suffer from mental health, afflicted by mental health issues.
out?
So it is very common for queer persons to have experienced depression. Suicidal ideation is very high amongst communities. Um, other mental health issues like anxiety, all these things are again very common for LGBTQ people. In fact, and also sexual violence is very common. So, I mean, and I sometimes feel that intervention sometimes becomes difficult in these communities because everybody has it. So there's a tendency to like, be like, why are you making such a big deal? Everybody's dealing with it. You should also deal with it. There's a tendency to do that. And no, but I think like mental health has been a real challenge when it comes to LGBTQ people. Problem is also that we don't have enough mental health therapists who are affirmative. So sometimes when you're depressed, you go to a mental health person. They have done more harm than good. Like when I was at this NGO that I was working for, it was very common for me to meet LGBTQ people who would have gone through some kind of regressive, quote unquote therapy. I'll call it a malpractice. So these malpractices like shock therapy or
Conversion
uh,
therapies.
a conversion therapy. I mean, how I don't know how the hell people are calling it therapy. It's not therapy. It's malpractice. So yeah, these kind of things were very common, and so this is why. And also see like when it comes to counseling, na, it's a very recent conversation. So for a lot of people who they go to counselors and they don't continue for various reasons. One is they've not understood the process itself, that it takes some time. Second thing is that they don't have the money to continue, and thirdly that affirmative nahi hai. They're not affirmative. So this is why like care and mental health becomes very difficult. And I think generally, if I think about movements, I feel like the agenda is very high in terms of talking against the politics of hate. But when you're talking against the politics of hate, you are still engaging in politics of hate. There isn't enough talk about politics of love, care, uh, you know respect, open communication, talking about feelings, giving emotions. We need to move away from those spaces also. And that's why I think like mental health is important conversation that needs to be had, is not having been had enough. uh, but I think like with this recent suicides that are happening, conversation slowly changing. I'm definitely hearing much more about mental health, and definitely in community circles. Like I've in this month itself, the Pride month itself, there have been at least 10 or 12 talks that I know of which were about mental health and community. Again, this was unheard of. Like 10 years back, you have depression, you don't know you have depression, you know. But now, it's called anxiety, it's called this, and like, people have the language. And I think that's what I tell you, like the minute you make something visible, automatically that access and the
Societal
conversation
perceptions
around
evolve.
it changes.
All right. So, do you have any personal experiences to share what you have faced, like in your journey, while you've been sort of an LGBTQ activist?
No, so I think like when I was in the closet, my life was very depressing and dark. I would say I went through a lot of bullying in my educational institute and the first workplace that I was part of. This really affected my mental health very badly. I had severe depression for many years,
Mm.
and I mean, I still sometimes feel that I can sometimes triggers can resurface very bad memories for me of those times. But this also led me to find out about mental health therapy and really work on myself and address the feelings of shame I had and convert them into pride. And since then, like since like 2-3 years of work, and I mean now I've been 14 years in therapy, uh, and it has made me very self-aware. And because of the work that I did on myself, self work, I actually started working with the communities. And one, of course, self work, but also when I started talking to different kinds of people in India, one, the general Indian public, but activists. This really changed my perception about sexuality in India, the conversation on sexuality. What I realized was that for like the majority of people, their conditioning is not of hate. It's not like they hate the LGBTQ community. They are ignorant. They just don't know. So because they don't know something here, there, they would have seen and they have some perception. But when you talk to them, especially if you talk to people respectfully, I have seen the most homophobic of people completely turn around if you are respectfully rationalizing, with them. This has been my experience. I've been also in my journey, I became very, very out. Initially, after I started talking with different people in India, then when people would ask me about opinions, I started giving quotes to the media. So initially, I used to use just my first name. Then I used my full name. Then I started using my photograph. And earlier, I was very scared. I used to feel like, okay, I don't know what the response will be. But I mean, my relatives were very supportive. And then there was this time when I came out, I was out on this TV show called Connected Humtum. It was airing on Z television for 3 months at prime time. And I was out about my sexuality on that show. So, during those 3 months, I was really scared that, what if I face some kind of backlash? If there's some right wing threat to me or threat to my life. I had a lot of imagination of danger. And but the thing was that during the course of the show running, and in fact even after that until now, I have only received love from people about that show and reaching out to me. Only one hate mail out of the hundreds and thousands of letters of support I've got. So that is really personally because of my own personal journey. I'm very confident. Like I feel like it's a it's a conversation that you can have of Indians with Indians. Before that, I mean, before this, I used to feel if I had not done this, um, you know, I would sometimes feel surreal journey of being this kind of out in public. I would not be saying this, but because I have, and I have the experience of being somebody really public, I mean, I can say that I am very hopeful about these things. It's really rooted in people who have never learned to question some kind of conditioning. But you start slowly helping them challenge and rationalize, and then they realize, suddenly your eyes open and you're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And I have seen like allies being the champions of change in the societies that they are part of. And really, really, I mean, even Yaria, like the youth group, I founded Yaria, co-founded it with a couple of friends. It was to work with young people. So that time I remember that nobody in colleges was talking about sexuality. Now, 10 years later, there are almost 10,000 people on that group. 10 years later, I mean, it's been 10 years with Yaria. In that city, in Bombay city, in almost every college, somebody or the other is out. Majority of them have support groups, youth support groups. This was would not have been possible, but because a few people decided to put things together and change the system, it affects. And now I can see that that is translated to other parts of India, and I've seen the movement like happen. So I am always going to be, I'm eternally optimistic and hopeful. And I mean, I can be hopeful because I've seen this now for about 15, 20 years. How movements change, how, like, I mean, it's just one conversation with you, Lavanya, but like, it will be this one conversation which will spark you to do something else 5 years later. And
Exactly.
this I've seen happen firsthand, with multiple people. So I think it's just about conversations, and advocacy is like that. Advocacy is a process. One conversation leads to the second, to the third. And you need multiple conversations with people, and we should regularly have them. That's what I feel.
Okay, so coming to the last question, what message would you like to give our viewers?
To the viewers, I would first of all say thank you for listening to me and being patient enough to go through this interview. I'm very thankful for that and grateful for that. And I would ask everybody who's listening on to this interview to, really reflect on the kind of conditioning they have and have empathy and respect towards people from the LGBTQ community. One thing that I would really like people to do is that if they see any form of bullying or harassment, or even like derogatory comments or even jokes being passed around about the LGBT community, to actually stand up against it, to make it like very vocally known what your stand on LGBTQ is. Because like whether it comes to educational spaces or workspaces, you can't expect queer people to be out in places that are in the closet themselves. So, it's important for people who can push that envelope and open that closet to really push it so that queer people can come out.
Thank you so
That's what
much,
I want to
Ms.
say.
Anani. It was an absolute pleasure to host you and hope you stay
Thank you.
safe and healthy during these times. Thank you so much for being
Thank
a
you.
part of With Vichar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.